So thank you so much. So I'm a consultant in clinical genetics, and my main area over the last 17 years has been familial cancer susceptibility. A number of you may have heard of Angelina Jolie. Well, in about 2012, she had preventive breast surgery, had reconstruction, it tripled referrals, and we wrote a paper called The Angelina Jolie Effect, which went around the world, helped me get my professorship. I always hoped that she would change my life. It wasn't quite what I originally had in mind. But I want to tell you a story today which is incredibly close to my heart. And it really is about how do you build trust in research. And for me, that only comes from co-creation and not tokenism. And this is today's story. It's a story about how you can go and try and establish something new when you're already very busy. And busy is a word I don't normally like, because I actually think the real word is about priorities. And this is a story I wouldn't have been able to tell 15 years ago, because it has a resonance not just in Chris's life, and he would explain his story, but also in my life and my family's life. And it involves not only the clinical genetics department, but also the brilliant work at UHL and university by the team at Research Space. And we spent many years getting the funding to help establish paediatric research, and it's a real honour and a pleasure, and a huge thanks to the organisers and to Nigel for the introduction today. We'll be talking about Fragile X, and in particular, how we can use research as a catalyst and as a lever to establish a national centre of excellence. And that getting a rare disease diagnosis is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. And it's not just about individual patients and treatment. It is about families. And it is about not just a gene, but the whole individual. And that's what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Hello, everybody. Slightly larger room than I was expecting. We were heading in a minute ago. It felt nice and intimate. So, hello, everybody. Pressure's on. So, first of all, when I say pressure's on, I get the slide to talk about Fragile X, but I am not a medical professional. I'm an IT guy. So, we'll have a go at this. Fragile X is the number one cause of an inherited intellectual disability. It is carried by 1 in 250 women and 1 in 600 men. It's described as a rare condition, but it doesn't feel that rare to me, especially when you start to talk to the community and you find a friend who knows somebody with Fragile X, or somebody else in the school, or somebody else, and suddenly you're surrounded by a community of people with Fragile X syndrome. So we have about 17,500 people diagnosed in the UK. It is believed that around 5% of autism, ASD, is actually Fragile X syndrome as the underlying cause, but not diagnosed. Everybody here today has heard of motor neurone disease, I'm sure. That affects around 5,000 people in the UK at any one time. So why the difference? Why has some people here may not have heard of Fragile X, particularly as I move through the NHS and talk to different departments? I hear a lot of people that say, oh, I saw it in my early research or something during my studies, but never again since then. And it's all around awareness. For me, it's around awareness. I can be a bit cynical because I don't work for the NHS. But it is about neurodevelopmental conditions getting getting put to one side, where neurodegenerative conditions such as motor neurone seem to get a lot more of funding moved to them from politicians, perhaps, or other groups and that sort of stuff. So we're on the battle to try and raise awareness and move it forward a bit further. But what does Fragile X actually look like? It is a mutation on the X chromosome. Most of us in this room will have 54 letters of the repeats of the letter CGG on our X chromosome. A pre-mutation carrier will have up to 199, which will be mum or dad. And then, for some unknown reason, at some point in a generational movement, it will expand to over 200 repeats of CGG. which means that there is a methylation of the FMR protein in the FMR1 gene. Hopefully Julian's smiling still as I get this right, which means that the proteins aren't released correctly in the brain, and therefore the brain doesn't develop. So what does that look like? It looks very much like autism, but with differences. So we have sensory processing, global developmental delays, behavioural challenges, autistic-like features, and often mobility, so hypermobility, low muscle tone, that sort of stuff. Often it is described as a boy's condition, and that's pretty much wrong. Females do have two X's, so the second X can make up for the first X, and so the impact may be seen less or maybe not seen at all, but it is still there, and we shouldn't discriminate against that group of people by saying it's a boy's condition when it's not, it's equal. Okay, so what does that look like? Right, so we have Evan with the yellow lanyard around his neck. He's my eldest, so he is full mutation Fragile X syndrome. We also have in the green jumper at the bottom on the sofa is Xander, so he's our middle son, and he is full mutation Fragile X as well. The difference, although they're brothers, same condition, same parents, the difference is Evan can talk for England. He will not stop. Lots of repetitive questioning, lots of difficulties around comprehension, transitioning, those sorts of things. Xander is more resilient, but he is completely non-verbal. So we use Makaton Sign and an iPad AAC talking device to talk with him. I say that, some of this research that we're going to talk about in a bit, we've seen massive leaps forward, and I've now moved from being to dad, which is wonderful. Don't do that. Right, so the little baby at the top is Finley. He's our magic baby of science. So he doesn't have the condition. He was something that clinical genetics helped us do. So let's move on. So our story. So Evan started to present to global developmental delays at 6 months old. We fought to try and get into through our GP to get into paediatricians to get some help. And we were told, no, they'll catch up at 7. We went to various other people that we know, and you can tell we're quite proactive parents. So we went to a few people, and they would all say, no, everyone catches up by 7. Evan started to develop a flattening of his head, so plagiocephaly from being slept on his back. And we pretty much forced our way into seeing a consultant paediatrician at Leicester Royal through that diagnosis. As soon as we got there, we said, yes, plagiocephaly, but actually we want to talk about global developmental delays. And she said, yes, I'm with you. Let's start to look at this. So 2.5 years later, MRI scans, ultrasounds on the brain, and lots of other bits and pieces, we were still no further forward. Slightly less than 2.5 years later. But we asked if we could have a second child. They said, yes, absolutely. Fill your boots. This is not anything to worry about. In this time, we had said that my wife has a female cousin with a son with autism. So the X-link is definitely there. But we were told, no, don't worry about it. Too far away. Go for it. And then Xander was born, and he screamed for the first 6 months of his life. So really, really tough time. We found Fragile X on Dr. Google. Don't know if you know him. Really good guy. We then presented that to our now community paediatrician, who said, no, not at all. This is a really rare condition. Only seen it once in my training. Definitely not. We carried on being proactive. And in the end, he said, fine, we'll do it just to shut you up. We were right, he was wrong. So then you get 12 weeks wait before you get to see clinical genetics. Every day we were phoning up to ask for a cancellation appointment. We know we've got 2 disabled children. We've got no access to help. So what can we do about that? Nothing. Wait 12 weeks. Have that appointment, and you're told fantastically what a Fragile X is, hopefully like I described it to you. And then we were asked if we want to have a third child using the PGD process, which is how Finley's here. But then you're told early intervention is key, and you're sent home, and the phone doesn't ring. Nobody calls, no services offer help or support, and there's nothing that happens. So I contacted the Dean of the Medical School for UHL, who said, talk to Julian. So I emailed Julian on a Friday night, out the blue, and Julian said, would you like to meet tomorrow for a coffee? So we sat down for a good half a day, mapping out the future of what that might look like. And Julian will tell you how he knew what that might look like. So, that's all.
Thank you. So I'd been through a very similar process in 2007. My son, who's here today, I'm very proud to say that he's here and has been my inspiration for this. And we very much had got skin in the game, and that is such an important aspect of this story, but not one that I would have been able to have played with the same vigour and with the same deftness of touch as Chris, and a huge kudos to him. He's been an absolute pleasure to work with on this project. But I'd been involved in working with patient groups in the cancer space, developing what's called the medical supermarket, where people could have events where they could go and talk to a psychologist, a psychotherapist, a genetic counselor, a dietitian, a physiotherapist, picking out the information which is important to them. So I knew about co-creation and trust. I wanted to do something similar. We'd worked with Christina Danes and James Greening, developing a research space, and I was heavily involved in the paediatric research facility and encouraging research through that here in Leicester. And had been just fresh off the end of the 100,000 Genome Project with Nigel and was looking for a fresh challenge. And Chris came at the right time into my life. And together we said, well, how are we going to be able to develop services? And this is where research came in. Follow the science. We were in a situation where there was amazing opportunities to take part in interventional commercial research and get off the ground. As soon as we mentioned this to Christina and put a couple of feelers out, the number of project opportunities which came in was incredible. Why? Because there's really exciting research going on, and we were able to get involved in the field, get established, and from there develop the stakeholder engagement to find out what's important to families and also who will come and play nicely in developing a national hub. And that's what it's about. Getting established, finding the stakeholders, finding what's important for your patients, having people with skin in the game, that once you've got that infrastructure, you can then start to think about an holistic hub.
I think it's to you, actually. Oh, no. So, right. So, yes. So, in that holistic hub, what support is out there? We've already covered it. There's nothing. So, nobody offers help. Nobody offers support. In the States, metformin is Fragile X is a payday because there are drugs such as metformin. It's low-dose sertraline for communication delays, occupational therapy, speech and language, psych, physiotherapy, you name it, you can keep going with these services that are needed. And so the profit-making hospitals can charge insurance companies for those services. In the UK, intellectual disability is not supported in a holistic sense. So, again, not wanting to say no for an answer, we couldn't talk to CAMS, we couldn't talk to anybody about low-dose sertraline for Xander with his speech and communication. So we started to look what else was about, and we found a CVD trial called Reconnect, which we managed to work with. Julian drove, Christina did a huge part, and we brought that to the UK, and we're the most successful site in Europe. What that's also meant is that we would have been passed over by other pharmaceuticals and research opportunities because of Brexit. But because the community we've built now in Fragile X, they recognise there is a potential in the UK and there's an opportunity. So we've got other trials and compounds and other things happening and moving forward, which is really good for us. So
with our research team, including Becky, Jackie, who's here today, and Lydia, we've been able to develop a cannabinoid gel and a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study. And we've seen incredible progress to the extent that one of the other research nurses came up to us and said, what did you do to that child? Is it the same child who's come through? The impact on the family unit and the siblings of additional needs cannot be overestimated. And we have a relationship and a contract with Relate for couple counselling and also for sibling and for family support. It's thinking holistically about occupational therapy, physiotherapy, psychology, schools and education. We write and offer support to individuals to get the schooling right for these, for the family. It's the cascading, and it's the hope that we're instilling about future research. And these are the messages we want to get across today. It's important to think about the family. It's important to think beyond pure diagnostics. And it's about getting your team and the right players together to become established and to develop these types of these hubs. Once we have a therapeutic hub for Fragile X, it opens up autism more easily. What we want to do is to have research as the central pillar to what we do. It's not right for everyone, but that's a way of getting established. It's what we've done, but it only comes from that joint partnership. Chris talking to families, working with the Fragile X Society, and not just talking to families. Chris has also been talking to pharmaceutical companies and talking about how we can use things like the medical supermarket model to actually have that engagement. And we want to also thank Leicester Charities, who helped us get established with conferences as well.
So that's...
We're going to have to...
Yeah, we are running short on time. So Julian and myself have sat down for many, many hours and developed what we have as our core principles of the Fragile X Hub, which is what we're creating. We have been able to get ourselves a fantastic team of volunteers together. So we have Vicky, who is a senior genetic counsellor. We have Sam, who is a psychiatrist at Leicester University, and associate professor. And then we also have Christina, for research management and those bits. This team is bigger as well. We have occupational therapy, ed psych joining very soon, and our hope is to be able to see families, and we're running a pilot where we'll see 4 families a month, and we will write an individual care assessment plan which they can get home to their local services and say, no, you have to help me, it's written here. So that's the idea. So why are we here? We're here to raise awareness and to talk about Fragile X, because nobody talks about Fragile X enough. And also, we're here to recognise that there are no experts in the UK, and the Fragile X community, I don't represent them all, but I represent a good part of them, and we recognise there are no experts, and we don't we're not expecting to come to you and say, we have Fragile X, fix it. What we'd like to do is come and say, this is Fragile X, come and learn it with us, come and be part of that journey. So from a research perspective, we're actually looking at using the NIH toolbox to look at cognition over time, to give a baseline to what we're doing. We need to validate that data. We've got lots of other research opportunities that are taking place. So if this is interesting to you, please reach out to Julian and myself, because we need people like you to step up and say, go on, I've got some time, let's help out.
There's going to be opportunities for gene therapy for conditions like Fragile X, and that is only going to come from better metrics so that we can talk to organisations such as NICE moving forward. And these companies are not going to engage with us and not provide us the opportunity for gene therapy unless we have an infrastructure and a community. And we're really delighted and honoured to be working with the Fragile X Society in a true co-creation project. Thank you very much for your time today. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
We do have a couple of questions for you, if that's okay. So the first one that I've got is, thank you very much for your inspirational talk. And a clinical question, when would you consider genetic testing for Fragile X in a person presenting with autism symptoms? We also have a couple of questions around diagnosis, around blood tests, etc. So something along those lines would be really helpful. Thank you.
So Sesame Street's brought to you by the letter A. So autism, additional needs, anxiety, aggression, apathy. In the grandparent, they may be ataxia, misdiagnosed as Parkinson's, and the mothers also, as carriers, can have anxiety and have a premature menopause. So that's anovulatory. So all of the A's, but watch for the family history. That's the key. The key here was the family history on the mother's side. So it's in my contract here at UHL to ask every 5 minutes, what's the family history?
So as a non-medical person, I'm going to chuck in just a couple of bits there. I would say first and foremost, listen to the parents. Mum knows best.
Yeah.
That's bad. Mum knows best, really. And then the other thing is, and this is more of an ask, when we come and see you and then you write the letters back to us that summarise the visit, please stop putting mum and dad are okay, or mum say it's all okay, or something like that. It doesn't help. And that's just a simple one. So when we're making DLA applications, when we're making other approaches to other services, if it says at the top that mum and dad say it's okay, then that really does hamper us. So that's not a moan, it's just a little chip in for extra.
That's great. And actually, there's one question that will kind of follow on from that. Okay. My daughter was diagnosed with Langer's cell histiocytosis. I'm sorry if I've said that wrong. We, as parents, had to find our own way through the NHS to be heard. How do you think we can facilitate better access?
Well, this is where I think the medical supermarket model could work really well. I do not understand why the NHS is not set up in this way. It's cheap as chips, and people are used to accessing all services in that way. And how many extra referrals did it result in? 0. Because people go and find what they want. So what you need to have for a diagnosis like that is once every 6 months or a year, those types of events where people can talk to a psychologist or talk to somebody involved in genetics or physiotherapy or education or whatever the issue that the child has. And for a condition rare like that, you only need to run 1 or 2 events in the country and it could be massively helpful.
That's great. Thank you very much.